So thanks for your patience and waiting for a few minutes. I know it's finals week, so it's great to have all of you here and final week on campus. So great to see so many people, and I'm sure people will be walking in as we speak. Welcome to the Center for International Development Speaker Series. My name is Sapna Salim, and this podium is not made for shorter people. So I'm going to be standing wherever I feel comfortable at this point. My name is Sapna Salim. I'm a graduate of the Graduate School of Education here at Harvard. I currently work with Professor Marshall Gans here at Kennedy School. I'm also a founder of Fehriya, which is a project based in India working on leadership development for young Muslim women. So this particular event is especially special for me, and I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing from Muthoni. Before we go into the event and I introduce our speaker, a few housekeeping items. So the speaker will be presenting for 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. Given that this is a hybrid event, we will be asking questions from both in-person and virtual audience. I will be walking around with the mic so that you can ask the question towards the end. We also are recording today's session, but the camera is on the speaker, so only audio of the audience will be recorded, and the video is going to be streamed on YouTube. This is the last speaker series of the semester, which makes it even more special. But we hope to see you all when we start up again in the spring. As a reminder for now, following each speaker series event, we will be hosting one-on-one coaching sessions with the speaker for students who've already signed up for this. Muthoni will also be speaking to students who've already signed up to get coached and get to know more about their career interests. Please look out for the CID newsletter, which comes out every Monday. So from spring as well, you will get to know more about the events that's lining up, and you need to be. It's on a first come first serve for the coaching session. So please do sign up soon. Now, to introduce my speaker here, our speaker, the event is titled "The Role of Gender and Inclusion in Development Programming," and our speaker is wonderful Muthoni Muriu. Ms. Muthoni Muriu brings over 25 years of international development experience and a passion for women's rights and social justice to her role as Senior Advisor, Diversity, Inclusion, and Shared Leadership at UN Women. Her current portfolio includes the development, implementation, and monitoring of UN Women's diversity and inclusion programs. Throughout her career, Ms. Muriu has been guided by a deep understanding of the centrality of women's rights in solving societal challenges with inequality and poverty. Previously, as Senior Director of International Programs with Oxfam America, she was responsible for delivering Oxfam's global programs, providing strategic guidance and practical management to 7 regional offices covering 30 countries, including the United States. Managing large multicultural teams, Ms. Muriu spearheaded several transformation processes focused on building internal equity cultures as a critical backbone to delivering on human rights and equality agendas. Ms. Muriu is from Kenya and holds a BSc in Politics and International Relations from the London School of Political Science and Economics and an MSc in Public Policy and Management from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Muthoni, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. And if you've already not noticed, we're both twinning. Ms. Muriu, please.
Yes. Good afternoon and bon appetit. The good thing about this session is I'm not between you and a meal. So I think I have all your attention. Yeah, so 20 minutes, what can I do? Just share some highlights, some illustrative stories. And I hope that in the next hour or so, what we're going to do is explore how organizational culture and internal power dynamics can impact priority setting for development organizations. When I first was asked about this, I thought, wow, you can take apart each of those words, role of gender, inclusion, development programming, and do a whole session on each. So putting them together, I'm not going to try to go really in depth. What I do want to do is to share with you a little bit of my experience and the importance of understanding how your internal organizational um, development has a direct impact on programming. The first thing that I'll say is that an intersectional approach is required to appreciate the multifacets that are needed when you're considering designing programs that directly impact the lives of communities. And as many of you know, I understand most of you, if not all of you, are graduate students. The intersectional approach was coined by Dr. Cranshaw, and it takes into account historical, social, and political contexts and recognizes the unique experience of the individual based on the intersection of relevant aspects of the environment and situation. And this approach is particularly important for those programs that apply a rights-based approach because it allows the particular experience of discrimination to be acknowledged and remedied. Development programs center human rights and as such need to pay particular attention to the different circumstances, be they cultural, economic, political, or societal of the communities that impact them. When the genocide in Rwanda happened in 1994, people fled in their hundreds of thousands, actually 500,000 fled into the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the humanitarian organizations that were there, as they rushed to give solace and provide for these communities, did all the things that humanitarian organizations do. They were quick to provide shelter, water, sanitation, food. And for a long while, that was thought to be enough. It was only months later, probably about a year later, that one particular aspect of that response, it was realized that there was a very important aspect of the response that was left out. This was the fact that many of the women who had fled had experienced sexual harassment, rape, and other types of harassment, either during their journey into the DRC, and some of them within the camps that were set up. So part of the resolution was that henceforth, in addition to the humanitarian infrastructure that was set up, we were going to provide psychosocial support. And in areas where there is conflict, you will find that this has now become the norm. So what is the role of gender justice in development? Noting, I know that all of you know this, but I'll just say it, that for the purposes of our discussion, this is not about the biological differences between women, men, and intersex persons. It is more about the characteristics and roles that societies attribute to women and men respectively. So this is gender as constructed by societies. Gender justice is about transforming gender and power relations, plus the structures, norms, and values that underpin them, because they are critical to achieving full equality and equity between men and women in all spheres of life. So within development, international development organizations, when you're defining and shaping policies, structures, and decisions that affect the lives of communities, you need to integrate consideration of these differentiators. So you have an intersectional approach, and you have gender justice and these differentiators. At the end it would have been 2003, at the end of the hostilities in Sierra Leone, at the end of their civil war, there was a spurt of trouble in Liberia, and communities again fled, and this time they fled to Guinea-Bissau. At that time, I was a policy advisor for Oxfam, and as we prepared to respond to the communities that were coming into Guinea-Bissau, in the room was myself, a gender advisor, and our engineers. So we're talking about water and sanitation engineers, public health engineers, etc. And as we talked about what would be needed, what needed to be set up, it was very clear that our engineers were already on the job. They knew exactly where to place the water spots, where to place the latrines, where the food rations would be given out, and where people would live. Then my colleague, the gender advisor, put her hand up when she looked at the map. Does anybody want to take a guess at what she saw that concerned her? So we had the bathrooms, or latrines are, the hole in the ground with a slab. That's called a latrine. We had latrines. We had water spots to get water. We had the tents where people would live and where people would get food. Anybody? Online, maybe? Where's the camera? Aha, getting warm. Close proximity. Well, to be fair, the water engineers had made sure that the latrines and the water sources were well separated. But there's a hint in your answer. Anybody else? Okay, so the latrines and the bathhouses were made all in one line, enough for everybody, right? But the problem was that women and children could not use the latrines in the night because of security. So in thinking about the design of the camp, we had to consider a couple of things. Many of the women running away were female-headed households. So women with children, single women, and then you had families, then you had men on their own. So they had to change the design, taking into consideration the needs that women have. So it wasn't enough to think about the latrines. It was just as important to think about who was going to use the latrine and how they were going to use this. I make this point because that consideration was the difference between women and children needing to, with the latrine right there, figure out how to go to the toilet at night, and a small change where accommodation or the habitation for single-headed, women-headed households and children and single women were on one side, close to security, and the latrines were split up when they were done so that they created safety. This is a really important point because it's an important point because when you don't pay attention to issues, the gender differentials in terms of what people need, whether they're men, women, etc. And this is an extreme case. But when you don't do that, then you end up designing programs that do more harm than good. In the invite, I don't know if they got a link to the article. There was an article that I had suggested people who signed up who could read. I'll leave it so that it's circulated. It talks about innovation in diversity and inclusion in humanitarian practice. And it references some other inclusive practices that are common across the board in organizations that are not necessarily international development organizations. So these are things like co-creation, across internal hierarchies, encouraging diversity of thought, dialogue, to share ideas and identify problems, and breaking down silos and deciding in terms of deciding who gets to contribute. Exploring how organizational culture can impact priority setting is an important aspect of planning within development organizations, more so now than ever before. And building on the issue of breaking down silos, there are some approaches that support this. And one of the ones that I wanted to highlight is the idea of shared leadership. Shared leadership is about a genuine transfer of power that accompanies distributed responsibility. It is based on shared accountability and allows teams and their members to act autonomously and maximize effectiveness within agreed frameworks. So this, along with co-creation and transparency, leads to greater accountability, contributing to a culture that values contribution and feedback. And this is critical for one, building trust, and two, making sure that you have the right information at the right time and that your teams are allowed to respond to issues as they come up, sometimes in very remote settings. I have the example of a colleague of mine who was working in Pakistan, in a rural area of Pakistan, very conservative, where they practice a type of modern purdah, which is where women are not really allowed to go out. In this particular community, they were allowed to go and fetch water, take their kids to the clinic, and work on the farm in the presence of a male member of their family. So when my friend arrived there, really remote, once you get there, it'll be 2 months before you get back to an urban setting. When the women were comfortable with her, they finally told her that they had a problem. One of the programs that was presented to this community and had already been implemented was bringing water sources closer to the houses. So at the end of the street, they would put a tap in so that women were not walking half an hour to go and fetch water. And when they were comfortable, the women let her know, her name is Sarah, let Sarah know that they were not happy with this new arrangement. She was confused. Why would you not be happy? You're now not walking an hour for water. Then they explained to her that because they're not really allowed to go out, the only time they got to speak to their friends and find out what's happening in the village and was when they were walking to get water. And if they had been asked, they would have said, well, you can put the tap, but put the tap 30 minutes away or 20 minutes away. What they really wanted was that the clinic where they took their children when they were sick, if that service could come closer to them, that took them 2 days, 1 day to get there, 1 day to get back. So the point that they were making was that what they really wanted was for a health center or a health worker to come closer to them. Now, the decision about the water point had been made not even in Pakistan. It was a program designed outside of Pakistan and then implemented because, of course, the idea is potable water near to everybody. Everybody knows that that's right. But for this community and for these women, it didn't work very well. I give this example because of one, the idea of building trust within diverse teams, but also trusting your teams to make the right decisions. And this brings me to mutual accountability. There is an excellent book by Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That book saw us through some very difficult transitions when I was at Oxfam. And it emphasizes that when teams continually build trust and embrace what he calls productive conflict, they become not only mutually accountable, but that accountability produces teams that work together to achieve what can be exceptional results. So many of you will probably join organizations where you're either in leadership or part of a team. It's really important to encourage curiosity, and even more than that, create psychological safety so that teams can be creative without fear of reprisal when a mistake is made. When we are talking about mistakes being made, who gets a seat at the table, and the internal power dynamics that sometimes impact priority settings, we have to note that in most hierarchical organizations, the power distance between leaders and their staff can sometimes create a dynamic that can actually be dangerous and lead to real risk, where not all voices are heard when they speak up about matters that could impact the organization or the business. The Haiti earthquake in 2010 was a terrible, terrible event, and hundreds of organizations rushed to Haiti, including my organization at the time, Oxfam, rushed to Haiti to provide secure to the populations affected. And you can imagine the usual, right on time, 72 hours, tents up, water points, latrines, everything, people working 18 hours a week, 18 hours a day, very difficult situation. So after a while, when things had sort of settled down, some colleagues decided to have a party on a weekend. And they invited some ladies from the community that we were serving. That is a no-no because of the power differential. That should never, ever have happened. So that happened, and then next weekend, same thing. And our Haitian staff, noticing this, decided to speak up and let these were international staff, and let the country director know what had happened. He heard them. The party stopped, but nothing else was done. Okay. Fast forward 7 years later, it is 2017-18, and Me Too, the Me Too movement is going strong. On our end, we have become really stringent and very vocal about sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment. And this story rears its head. And it turned out that all the people who had indulged in this behavior had gone on to work in other humanitarian settings. And so we had our own internal Me Too moment. But here is the thing. This was such a big risk and such a serious moment that it almost brought a $1 billion organization to its knees. Because as advocates of women's rights, really pushing all other organizations hard to on gender justice and the prevention of gender-based violence. This was something that we could not excuse. It had happened under our noses, and we hadn't really done anything about it. The next point that, the reason I make this point is that we all have bias, right? And what's really important with that is recognizing bias and managing it so that it does not affect decisions. So in this instance, you had a hierarchical situation, you had a power distance, and maybe there was a bit of bias between national and international staff. These are the things that, these are the issues that now that we now pay greater attention to. The results, as a result of this, we paid a lot more attention to what happens internally in terms of inclusion, who is at the table, how are we listening to each other, and most importantly, how is power perceived and how does it circulate within the organization. We also adopted participatory approaches uh, uh, because they are an important precursor of the manner in which organizations work with communities to design responses. And this is recognizing that all people within your organization should be heard, have a right to a say. And when you're working with communities, that all of them, including those who are experiencing poverty, have a right to shape their own development and the public decisions that affect them. From where I stand, all of this can be summarized under feminist leadership principles. And these are principles that underline a gender justice and inclusive approach to sustainable development programming. This is about nothing about us without us, including the people who are affected by decisions. It's about understanding power, how power moves within organizations, how it's perceived, and how it's used. And at its most basic, this is about commitment to creating alternatives within organizations, alternatives to traditional hierarchical leadership and organizational cultures that are often patriarchal in nature. And this can take many forms, from critical self-reflection on the individual level to developing new decision-making structures at the collective level. And most importantly, feminist leadership principles don't have a fixed definition. It is an ongoing process of learning and unlearning those things in society that lead to perpetuating some of the inequalities that we know of well. It's also about consciously sharing power and the responsible and transparent use of power, appropriate consultation, accountable collaboration, and finally, zero tolerance on any form of discrimination and abuse of power. So I'll just end by saying that an intersectional approach is required to appreciate the role of gender justice and other inclusive practices in the design of international development programs. And I hope that the examples that I have provided, which are real life examples, have illustrated some of these points. Thank you.
If you have questions, you can raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I want to go to Oxfam because I worked with Mark last year back in the UK, and he wasn't the head of the organization when the scandal happened. And I want to get your perspective on, like, when there's such a big scandal, like the idea of blame and responsibility and who gets to go, get thrown in front of the bus. And is that fair?
So it happened. The first thing when a crisis like this happens, yes, you put a crisis team together, etc. But you must admit that it happens. You have to take responsibility. That is the first rule. You have to take responsibility. And I think that in the end, we took responsibility. We put together a commission that guided us through really taking a deep look in terms of what cultural changes we needed to make sure that this didn't happen anymore. We had a 10-point plan. I think the implementation comes to an end in 2023. So it was over 3 years. So you have to acknowledge and accept responsibility because it happened. Yes. So the question of fairness Well, yes, there was a little bit, no, it happened. So you have to take responsibility. I'll leave it at that.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
My name is Leonardo, and before coming to HKS, I was working with the UNWFP.
Yes.
So, and my last position was actually in Kinshasa, DRC. So, all you're
Yes.
saying really resonated with me. Um, so, being part of the UN, like I also encountered lots of frustration from seeing these reports, like undermining all the credibility of the organization. And I wanted this to stop from happening again in the future. But I always felt constrained while I was connected with the UN because of contractual arrangements of how could I influence, how could I make sure that like this wouldn't happen. So looking from the inside as a humanitarian, what can we do even if we're not in a leadership position to make sure that these reports are well, they don't, well, the problem is not about the report, it's about the acts in itself. How can we stop these acts from happening and also um, protect the not not only the victims but also the whole work of the organizations, because as you said, like the 1 billion organization was put to its knees. So it's mainly about how to protect yeah, the victims in first place, but also yeah,
Yeah.
pursuing the right punishment and like making sure that people understand that they're not meant to do that.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is the acknowledgement of the humanitarian sector, of the development and humanitarian sector, that for a while we not coasted, but there was this assumption because of our missions and the fact that we had this, all the organizations have these missions, that they're right-based, etc., that that they would do the right thing. So collectively, there is there was an acknowledgement that we weren't doing enough. So as far back as 2004, I think that's when there was a big issue in Sierra Leone with WFP, actually. The whole of the humanitarian sector and development sector got together and began to put together some guidelines and some policies around protection. So sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and the sort of rules that I was talking about, where it is not okay if you are in a humanitarian setting and you're providing humanitarian aid to then, party with the population that you're trying to help, because that power differential is just too big. So I think that the whole sector is making strides. There's a lot more attention being paid to issues of protection now more than ever. And I also think that one of the things that has happened, and this was 2017, 2018, is that people have a lot more sources of information now. And so it is more likely that when there is wrong that has been done, that will be known and then rectified. And I also think that because of the past, of what's been happening in the past 10 years, there's been a lot more attention to putting in safeguards against the sort of issues that you're talking about.
Hello, thanks
Hi.
very much for the talk. My name is Laila Khandakar. I'm a student here. And
Yes.
before coming here, I worked with Save the Children International in several countries. And as you say, most of the rights-based organization or international organizations have gender and inclusion policy in their organizational practices or program and advocacy design. But I have observed few things that I wanted to share because it
Yes.
will be good to have your comments and thoughts. I think One of the big challenge I find is in the way the organization, big organizations try to roll these programs in the countries. In many cases, it becomes a matter of KPI, like key performance indicator. So you start, ticking boxes. Or do you have this on gender? Do you have this on inclusion? Before developing sufficient ownership of the issues and why it's important, explaining those. If you start doing KPI, then it will not bring, significant changes.
Yeah.
Another thing I find is bringing this to a country of global south as a Western concept. But despite patriarchy, of course, patriarchy is a huge issue. But how we can also consider the protective factors or good practices, because if you go to most of the countries in their literature tradition, there are a lot of positive things about rights of women and all that also, right? So how to localize, I think that's a very important thing in my mind in terms of acceptance. And another thing I have also found that a person may be working for a rights-based organization, but he or she is a product of that particular society. So to begin with, his or her mindset, carries a lot of the social norms. So even when you have signed a code of conduct for your organization, probably you are doing it from 9 till 5. You are, trying to follow. But the moment you are out of your office, you are forgetting that. So I think probably that explains to some extent why the progress is not as we expected it to be. Because if people are not changing, people who are designing and implementing the programs, they are not owning the concepts and their mindset is still as before, then probably they will not be able to design and implement programs that are gender sensitive and inclusive. So I'd like to hear your thoughts because you have lots of experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me start with that last one. I'll give the example of child marriage. I don't know if this has changed yet, but 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, the age of consent in Liberia was 15 years. And in a couple of other countries, including in the United States, by the way, children can get married with consent, at 15 years. And as we began to develop codes of conduct that looked at gender rights, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, sexual harassment. One of the things that we did was adopt a universal age of consent, which was 18 years. And so the question came up, so what happens in a place where you can marry a 15-year-old, because that's the age of consent? It was a huge internal debate because of this thing, the work, the society, exactly what you've laid out. But in all consciousness, we could not, on one hand, be talking about the rights of women, about protection, and then also say it's okay if members of staff were getting, were marrying children. And what was the debate? The debate was about culture, it was about boundaries, it was about respect of culture, etc. In the end, we decided that this was in the interests of women and children, because at the same time we're running an education campaign where we wanted girls especially. This was the gender parity campaign on education. Wanted girls to go to school and stay in school and finish school. And we're running health campaigns in all good consciousness. We couldn't run those campaigns and then say, oh, by the way, these campaigns mean nothing to you internally, because then you're not walking the talk. And so we in the end, we decided that this is our internal policy. If you work for us, you need to know this when you're coming on board. And when you sign that code of conduct, it means if you contravene it, then you can no longer work for the organization. And we had to do that having exhausted the debate and the discussions and in all the different communities where this would become which would become an issue. So those are very difficult and personal conversations, but they need to be had. And this is a lead up to say that we have to walk the talk and not just, talk for the sake of talking. And for me, the idea, the big debate on localization is almost a false debate. Why do I say that? Localization is this idea that, yes, we can trust local organizations and nationals of countries to know their culture, to know the context, and to be able to manage resources, to implement programs that respond to the issues that are there. And so the localization is about localizing resources so that they're not managed overseas and then sort of implemented somewhere else. I think we have to be honest. There's a little bit of paternalistic approach there. I'm from Kenya. I was born, educated in Kenya. There's absolutely no way you're coming to tell me I'm not capable of managing a program in Kenya, right? So yes, I am your local expert. And on that basis, you need to trust me to know the program and to deliver the KPIs that we have designed that are appropriate. This is the Pakistan example, right? That if the design of that program had been done considering local knowledge, considering what the communities who were going to benefit from the program, what they actually needed, what they wanted, they would have designed a health program and a water program, maybe better water, potable water, but they would have designed something quite different. So my answer to the localization debate is that with all the goodwill in the world, this doesn't happen until we unpack what it really is about, and it's about trust. It's about trusting or trusting people living in their own country, in their own context, to manage resources. And it's about getting to a point where we can actually say that's what it's about, and then have a conversation about, so how do we level this up so that you can trust us with the resources? And then finally, the point that you made on ownership, it's the same answer, that there's indigenous knowledge. And this is the point that I was making all through, that as you think about, this is the inclusion part. Inclusion is not just having people at the table, it's allowing them to actually speak. It's allowing them to, it's actually hearing what they're saying, and it's allowing them to contribute to programs and issues that affect their communities in a way that in a way that has outcomes and outputs that will actually move the development of their communities forward. And sometimes it's not, it can't happen in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. You would then have to accept that it'll be based on what the local conditions actually are. Thank you. Those were great questions.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes.
My name is Sarah, and I'm also a student here, but previously I was working at UNESCO.
Okay.
And I would like actually to share a tool that we have been working on for the past 3 years. So it's called Her Atlas. So it's an interactive map that basically monitors a girl's right to education in countries. And I would like to share maybe one highlight from the figures. 8% of countries are still restricting women who, girls who are pregnant or parenting from their right to education. So for us, it's our efforts to basically work with the countries to change the laws and regulations and to basically rectify their right to education laws to ensure that all girls have their right to education. So just wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What is it called again? Her Atlas?
Her Atlas.
Okay.
And you'll see there are color coded where it tells you where the rectifications has been made and where countries are.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll have a last couple of questions.
Are there any online? No? Okay. Wow, you're a great group. Have some more food.
Thank you so much for this powerful talk.
Yes.
I'm Nishant. I'm from India. I was an Equity Inclusion Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. One of the challenges that I have seen in India, specifically in development sector organizations, when we talk about making people informed about the role of gender and inclusion in those organizations, it almost always gets reduced to doing these gender workshops and DEI workshops, and that's it. I would love to learn from you, how do we make our organizations, our dev sector organizations, continuously learn about the role of gender and inclusion beyond these workshops and trainings?
Yes, so that is very true. I think part of the solution for us came from interrogating our strategic objectives and determining what it is we wanted, what it is that we wanted to really contribute to. And the reason why we moved away from talking about gender mainstreaming to gender integration was that we would then include or incorporate gender analysis across the board, irrespective of what was happening. It had to show, the gender analysis had been done. This is why the example I gave you of the humanitarian of the Guinea-Bissau camp that we were setting up, you had a gender advisor in the room because each plan had to have several things happen to it. Of course, you have the design of the plan. You have the financial folks who say, is it feasible? Can we do it? You have the fundraising folks and some of the communications folks. But you also then need to interrogate it from two perspectives. One is the gender justice perspective. Why? Because gender justice and women's rights are actually central to resolving many of the societal ills that we have. The second is that without doing that on a consistent basis, then you have what you're describing, which is the workshops. So we moved away from talking about gender mainstreaming to talking about gender integration within all aspects of programming. And it's an important shift because it means that when we run a campaign, or you have research that's been done, or you have policy briefs you want to take out, or you're designing programs or doing community outreach, all of your plans have to integrate gender analysis. And that means that your outcomes should reflect whatever came out of your gender analysis. It's a political move, but it's a very important one.
Any last thoughts or questions?
So previously I've worked in places like in South Asia, like Nepal, where we do come across issues with gender relating to girls not telling us their preferences. And in my experience, I think I found it really difficult to actually get girls to express very explicitly what their preferences are when we are designing programs. So I was wondering if like you had experience in such circumstances, how do we get girls in those circumstances to express to us maybe in privately like what their true preferences are, especially in patriarchal societies where they're not used to maybe explicitly telling people in positions of power like what their needs are.
Yeah, that's yeah, that happens. So in the north of Sudan, in Darfur, we were at a camp where we had a community meeting, and we wanted to ask about uh, the water situation, whether it was adequate, etc. And we had both men and women. We said, of course, the women have to be there. And the men talked. The women didn't say a word. And so my colleague and I, actually the one who was in Pakistan during the story, my colleague and I thought, okay. So we said, okay, we want to now split the meeting. And we got the men to leave with some of our colleagues and stayed behind with the women. Oh my goodness. They whipped out their phones and they had these lists. They were, they were saying, they were talking about the placement of some of the new water pumps, all the things that, because they're normally the ones who are responsible for the family's water, etc., they were actually the experts more than the men. So I use that as an example to say that you would need to figure out innovative ways, maybe gamifying things, maybe through art, etc., to get women and especially girls to speak up, and especially in very patriarchal societies. So by the time Sarah was getting to that place in Pakistan, they had had that program going for 2 years. They had never heard that there was a problem with this water placement until she got there. She was a woman. She made it a point to get to know them, to make friends with them, and then heard what the problem was. So it's about being innovative, and maybe for us, working in organizations, maybe going outside of our comfort zones to figure out how best to communicate. So there's a bit of work in there, but I don't know, art.
All right, we're at the end of our time. Can we give a big round of applause for Ms. Muriu?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muriu, for bringing us your decades of experience in under 20 minutes as a presentation and answering questions, reminding us about conscious leadership and reminding us about leading with people and not over people, and understanding that the people in specific contexts know the best solutions for them, and reminding about that. Thank you so much, and we're glad to have you.
Pleasure.
One round of applause as we close. And thank you everybody for being here, and good luck on finals, and have a great holiday.
Good luck with finals.